Picasso and Matisse both inherited from their 19th century predecessors an interest in raising the status of drawings to be on a par with the status of works in other mediums, paintings, sculptures. In the first decade of the 20th century, both of them put an enormous amount of effort into their drawings. A very large percentage of them are finished exhibition works on paper. Not little sketches of the sort that an artist would make in preparation for doing an oil, but drawings as drawings with something particularly interesting to say. And after World War I, when Picasso began his long relationship with the dealer Paul Rosenberg, Rosenberg's first exhibition was an exhibition entirely of drawings and watercolors by Picasso. So this sheet was done perhaps a year later and is a variation on one of the themes that Picasso treated the most often in the early 20s, showing two women together. It's an exhibition drawing where Picasso is showing the entire process that goes on in his effort to make a representation. He is working with his hands, and the hands of the models take on lives of their own. They aren't really holding hands so much as touching their fingers, and the fingers seem to be completely awkward in a way that the bodies of the woman with their sort of conventional classical lines seem so full of grace and tradition, but the fingers give them a peculiar presence and reality to who they are and what they're doing as they pose for Picasso here. He's showing a series of stages which will become one of the most abiding innovations in the graphic work of both Picasso and Matisse for the rest of their careers. This effort to indicate the process of drawing became of enormous interest to Henri Matisse, who would be Picasso's great rival as a draftsman in the 1920s and 30s and 40s. And this group of drawings includes a wonderful example of Matisse doing pretty much the same thing 19 years later as what Picasso had done in his exhibition drawing. Here he shows a young woman reclining in a chair, but he has developed his drawing out of a frenzy of lines, most of which are quasi-obliterated so that he can reach the final outlines that he's chosen for his drawing that rest upon all of the ideas that led up to it. When one looks at contemporary art today, over and again, one will find the same sort of mannerism where the artist chooses to leave evidence of their earliest ideas to show the creative effort necessary in reaching a conclusion. There's also a drawing by Matisse from the following year, 1939, in this collection, which shows one of his favorite poses for his models in the late 1930s, where they will be at rest or fully asleep. In this case, though, as Matisse develops the drawing, there are indications of where he's coming from that are not only the muffled, half-erased indications of where he started, but also seem to record the movements of the artist as he takes his eye off of her to work on the paper and then readjusts to look at her again. You can see a sort of a shifting, especially in the hand that she's resting on, in her hair. So you feel that again, drawing is being made somewhat cinematic, somewhat narrative by this emphasis on the full range of the technique from start to stop. Matisse's drawings of this sort became of particular interest to Picasso in the mid-1940s when he met a young art student named Françoise Gillot, who was totally enraptured by the work of Matisse. She encouraged Picasso to start a dialogue with Matisse that had been, somewhat dormant for the past 3 decades. And Picasso, very much to win Françoise, began to portray her in the style of Matisse. This particular drawing, which really hasn't been seen for 20 years at this stage, is probably the fullest and most ambitious of all of Picasso's images of her, in the same pose that was familiar to them both from Matisse's works, but also in a pose that had been part of Picasso's stock in trade since the very beginning of his career, where periodically he had shown attention to images of women vulnerable and asleep, as if trying to imagine their private thoughts in this adjusted state. This image of Françoise is a unique image of her, a unique colored, highly dense image that is almost a form of graphic worship. Françoise was supposed to be a redhead, or at least to have a reddish tint to her hair, and that seems to be graphically what Picasso is attempting here, to show highlights of red in that otherwise sort of lunar and nocturnal image of his mistress, who, by the way, at this point is 10 weeks pregnant with their first child, Claude, who will be born the following year. This extraordinary group of drawings comes from the estate of Mrs. Henri Aberbach of New York. They are so revealing to think of in connection with one another that it's almost sad to think that they could be separated as a result of this sale.